नमस्कार. आयच्या ह्या खाशेल्या कार्यावळीन तुमकां सगळ्यांक येवकार. आमी जेन्ना भुरगे आसले तेन्ना स्कुलान आमी शिकताले त्या वेळाचेर आमकां सायन्स आनी मॅथ्स हे दोन सब्जेक्ट सदांच आमकां तेजो भंय दिसतालो. आयच्या काळान सुद्दां आमी पळयतात की जरी एज्युकेशन आनी टॅक्नॉलॉजीचो वापर चड जाता तरी सुद्दां खंय तरी सायन्स आनी मॅथ्स हे दोन सब्जेक्टाचो आजुनूय लोकांक भंय दिसता. आयज नॅशनल सायन्स डे आनी ह्या दिसाचें म्हत्व म्हणजे सर सी.व्ही. रमन हेंच्या रमन इफेक्ट ह्या तेंच्या डिस्कवरी खातीर तांकां नोबल प्रायज दिल्ले आनी त्या खातीर तेंची एक रिमेंबरन्स तेंची एक आठवण म्हणून आमी हो दीस नॅशनल सायन्स डे म्हणून मनयतात. ह्या दिसाचें म्हत्व आनीक जाणून घेवपा खातीर सायन्स ओशनोग्राफी ह्या वेगवेगळ्या विशयाचेर जाणून घेवपा खातीर आमच्या वांगडा आयज आसा डॉक्टर सतीश शेटये. ही इज जिओफिजिस्ट, ओशनोग्राफर and former director of National Institute of Oceanography. Sir, welcome to the show.
Very nice to be here.
Sir, माझा पहिलो प्रश्न तुमकां असो की why do you think that the students hesitate to take science or maths in their further studies?
I think there is a misconception that science and mathematics are difficult subjects. I think the proper way to look at it is you need a certain kind of thinking in order to do well in these subjects. And if you imbibe that thinking, I think these subjects don't look as hard as they are often made to be. Now, let me qualify that a little. These subjects do require certain amount of discipline. They require certain amount of hard work, focus, certain amount of dedication to these subjects. So I think students who imbibe these qualities in their studies don't have as much problem as it is often made out to be. Now, there is another reason why students don't pursue science in their further studies. They very often go for engineering and so on. That is the other aspect of this issue. And that aspect has two different reasons. There are two different angles from which you have to examine it. Number one is in India, our parents pay for our education. They support us throughout our life as a student. And we being not so affluent a country, being a country which is only now emerging as a middle class dominated society, have this compulsion to make sure that at the end of your studies, you will have a career in a profession that would support you, your family for the rest of your life. And that happens more efficiently if it is an applied field like software engineering, which is so very common these days, or any kind of engineering where the probability of getting a job is higher. And I think that is a compulsion that many of the Indian students have to face, and for real reasons. But I think you have to approach this topic from another angle altogether. And that is, it doesn't really matter which field you go into. The message for the Science Day is not really doing science per se, but imbibing scientific thinking in day-to-day activity, including you could be studying engineering, you could be an engineer, as long as the thinking is scientific. I think that is okay. That is what the message, as far as I'm concerned, that is what the message of celebration of Science Day is, that let us be scientific in our approach. Now, you might ask, what does that mean? First thing is, there are certain elements of this thinking that you need to master, in fact. The first thing is that an observation, an experimental result, a carefully recorded fact is the ultimate truth. And anything else that you do has to be consistent with that truth. That is the basic principle. You could have theories, you could have your own interpretations, but you have to always ensure that you are consistent with what the observations show. It's very often said that scientific thinking has two parts to it. What is going on and why is it going on? What is going on is really the part where you make sure that your observations are properly carried out, your experiments are properly conducted, and your facts are reliable. That is what tells you what we know. Second question is why we know. We explain what we know by constructing theories, by using somebody else's theories, by interpreting what the observations show, by using our own ideas. As long as you make this distinction between what, which is related to observations, and why, which is related to interpretation and or theory and so on, I think you are doing good scientific thinking. And that could be done if you are a software engineer, if you are a civil engineer, or any kind of applied work. As long as that thinking is imbibed, I think the purpose of Science Day is served.
Okay, so this year the theme is integrated approach in science and technology for future future sustainable. So how do you think that the science and technology play an important role in sustainable development?
I think this is a very important question in today's world. See, the world, the human beings have today reached a stage where our activities are having an impact on a global system, like atmosphere, like the state of or the quality of the waters, of the oceans, of course, of the rivers, the air that we breathe, are today coming under the influence of our activities. Like, how many factories do we have? How much water do we consume from a pipeline? How much of that water is let into natural systems by through various outfalls that we have, either in the oceans or in the rivers and so forth. This is unprecedented. Before the Industrial Revolution, there was no human activity which had the magnitude that it has today. Today, we have reached a level where a global system can be influenced. Now, when that is a fact of life, and this is a very carefully recorded, very carefully observed fact of life, when that is the state, I think everything that we do needs to be examined carefully. If an outfall is to be located at a particular place in the river, you have to worry about how will the natural composition of water change because of that outfall. how much of dissolved oxygen will be there in that water before the outfall becomes operational, and then examine what will be the state of dissolved oxygen after the outfall becomes operational. And answering questions like this require science, it requires technology, it requires some common sense thinking and so forth.
Okay.
But today, it is important that we make these calculations. 500 years ago, that may not have been necessary, because whatever that we do was not on a scale where we need to worry about these questions.
So how do you think is important celebrating such days like National Science Day? You know, there are various exhibitions, science festivals held. So do you think that celebrating such Science Day or National Science Day or creating some awareness about the science subject will help the students to get into the science?
I believe they will. What triggers a student to pursue a certain field depends very much on circumstances. It is influenced by a large array of possibilities. But through these exhibitions, through this awareness, you increase the probability that somebody will get hooked to scientific thinking. Somebody would become interested enough to take it up as a field. But as I said earlier, it doesn't really matter what field you pursue, as long as your approach is scientific in thinking. So I think through the exhibits, through awareness, you become more aware of how day-to-day problems are handled, what are the new events which are happening in the world of science and technology. You become aware of how things might be 10 years from now with regard to various things that we take for granted today. What would be the nature of mobiles 10 years from now? This is an instrument which we use so very frequently, and maybe depending on how the technology is going to evolve, our reaction to it is going to be different. Our use of it is going to be different. And I think we should be aware of these things.
Okay. Sir, you are also an oceanographer. So the basic is science. So do you think that during your time the science was not that much developed? Like in today's day, we can see that mobiles or there are various sources of information for us to get into science or to know about science. So during your time, how you used to get the information or do you used to do a research?
Well, it is true that when I was growing up, there was no internet. And today, this vast resource, Wikipedia, for example, didn't exist earlier. But to somebody who was curious, there were alternatives. There were encyclopedias, very well-known encyclopedias, which have been eclipsed by availability of the internet today. But there were resources. There were libraries which you could approach. There were very well-written books. The emphasis was so very much in good writing, careful writing. One could use these resources and struggle. Maybe a struggle was a little more than what is required today to access this information, but there were avenues.
Okay, so you are known by the research work you have done in the monsoon current waves. So could you please tell our viewers more about it, your research work?
Okay. We at NIO, a group of people at NIO, asked ourselves the following question. what is the nature of currents along the coasts of India, that is, along the east coast and the west coast. How does it vary? It was known at that time that because we come under the influence of the monsoons, these currents are going to vary with time, depending on what is the nature of winds, because wind is the main driver of ocean surface currents. So it was expected that you would see a variation from season to season. But precisely when does the change take place? Which direction do the currents go? At the surface or at subsurface level was not all that very well known. So our team carried out observations using ships, and this is a program which went over a few years to record what is the nature of the currents, both at the surface and at subsurface levels. And that provided a picture which was not all that understandable. And so I mentioned to you earlier, you first answer the question what, and then you go and answer the question why. So our observations explained what was the nature of currents in the vicinity of the coastline. And then we needed to understand it. And the picture kept, and as you build your explanations, there is argument, counter-argument, and the picture kept getting more and more complicated until we realized that in order to understand even what is happening in the vicinity of 10 kilometers from our coastline, you really need to look at what is happening over the entire North Indian Ocean, including the equatorial region. And that, to me at least, was a surprise, that effects which are triggered so far away from our coastline actually do have an impact on what is happening at the coastline. So if you stand at Miramar and say, imagine there is a current, say 10, 20 kilometers towards the sea, and you ask yourself, what is influencing the currents in that region? If somebody had told me, oh, what's happening over the equator of the Indian Ocean has a strong impact on it, I probably wouldn't have believed it at the beginning of my career at the National Institute of Oceanography. But today I can see how that connection gets set up.
Okay.
So these are some of the issues that we handled. Understanding the currents was one of the major problems.
Okay. Sir, another thing I would like to highlight is Goa is one of the leading and seen as one of the state with the highest literacy rate. It is 88.7%, but still we are still unable to produce a good scientist or good number of representatives at a national and international platform. So why do you think, where are we lacking behind?
Well, you must realize that the population of Goa is approximately 1% of the national population. So in all fairness, we should expect that if there is n number of people who do well in a particular field or a combination of fields, then under the assumption that we are equally distributed around the country, about 1% of those should be coming from Goa. And I think we do that. We being a small state, you can't expect it to be dominated. Yes, our literacy rate, I think, gives us an edge over others. And I think in general, you do find Goan students doing reasonably well and perhaps better than elsewhere. But our number is small, and sometimes one tends to get influenced by that and create the impression that we are not doing as well as others. I don't think one has to worry about it. The second thing is, as I mentioned earlier, it's not important whether you work in engineering or in medicine or in pure sciences. What is important is doing or the thinking that goes into your profession is scientific, it is well established, it is well argued, argued using the established norms of what is called the method of science. So I think we are doing reasonably well as far as when you put those numbers in perspective.
Okay. How oceanography do you think impact our lives?
Okay. For the purpose, let us stick to India. And let us say you are living somewhere on the East Coast. One of the first things that you need to know, and if you are living close to the coastline, close to the shore, one of the important things you need to know is what to do when there is a storm surge, because they do occur half a dozen times along, or more recently, more than that, along the coastline. So here is a direct impact of the ocean on the life of people who live on the coastline. We are fish eaters all over the country, and what happens in the ocean does influence how much of fish there will be in the market. And so this is another way by which the ocean has an impact on what we do. So I've just given you two examples, but there are a number of issues where what happens in the ocean does influence our lives, our our well-being, in fact, and on a very large scale. We live in the monsoon system, and this system is a system where atmosphere and the ocean interact in order to produce what we ultimately get: number of cyclones, how cold is it going to be, how warm is it going to be, how rainy is it going to be. All these factors are influenced by atmosphere and ocean together.
Okay. So one more thing, what is ocean acidification and how it largely affect our lives?
If you have more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, there are interactions which take place with the atmosphere between the ocean and the atmosphere. The net effect of that is the acidity or pH of water changes. It becomes more acidic. Now, this we don't realize, but has an impact on many things. Like in the ocean, there are organisms that have crusts which are made of shells, and they are made of material which can dissolve in a more acidic environment. You asked me earlier about sustainability. We, a few centuries ago, wouldn't have to worry about such questions. But today, because our carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has reached a level where the interaction between the ocean and the atmosphere does produce significant, does have significant impact on the acidification of the ocean, we need to worry about it. And this is something which we need to be concerned about. Anytime we do something to the atmosphere in terms of an exhaust, We today have to worry about what are going to be the implications, not just to the atmosphere at that particular location, but to the global system as a whole.
Okay. So my last question is, what message do you want to give to our audience and the students who are pursuing science?
I think on this Science Day, I would like to reiterate what I said earlier. It doesn't matter in what field you are. You could be studying hardcore scientific field like chemistry, physics, or you could be studying engineering, or you could be studying sociology or history. As long as you follow a scientific approach to the questions that you need to encounter and need to worry about on a day-to-day basis, as long as your approach is scientific, which means pay proper attention to what the observations is, when you evaluate, when you interpret those observations, follow the discipline that that science has encouraged us to follow the method of science. I think we should be doing all right.
Okay. So on this note, I end this program, sir. It was really pleasure having you in our studio.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
ओके. अशाच प्रकारच्या वेगवेगळ्या कार्यावळी आम्ही तुमच्या मुखार घेऊन येत राहतले. तोपर्यंत पळयत राहा प्रुडंट.